Hello and welcome back to Continental Club, where we discuss the hottest topics in European football. It's another lockdown edition, I'm afraid, the second week of it, but hopefully we'll bring some joy to your quarantine lives. Joining me today, we've got Chris Hamill and Pato, and we've got a really good episode lined up for you today. Basically, in light of the current situation, the coronavirus obviously, we're not quite sure how much clubs will have to play with financially this summer in the transfer market. So at Kunal asked, who are the best forwards available across Europe at bargain prices next summer, less than £20 million? But what we've decided to do is just give you, an overall spread of the best bargains available this coming summer, which could prove useful to your club. And we're going to kick off, Chris, with a very experienced striker heading out of PSG.
We are. It's the one and only Mr. Edinson Cavani. Just need to clear my throat there, mate, because I wanted to do this section justice. Yeah, he's 33 now. We spoke an awful lot about him last year, at the start of this year, in the winter window, about whether he would accept sort of being a bit part player at PSG. He's racked up an awful lot of minutes in recent seasons and has very much got used to being the centrepiece of their forward line. That is no longer the case. There were rumours that he was going to join Atletico Madrid. I think we thought that was going to happen. I remember being fairly bullish on it, but that's not how it panned out. It sort of made sense at the time, didn't it, with Diego Costa being so unfit. But he's been an absolutely fantastic surgeon for PSG, and I think he deserves to choose his next club, and he should go wherever makes him bloody happy, Boogie. So, since arriving from Napoli in 2013, for 64 million euros, by the way. I forgot how punchy that fee was. I think it was the sixth largest in history at the time. He's more than repaid their financial faith and financial investment, hasn't he? So 14 trophies, 5 of them league titles. He's got 200 goals in 301 appearances. Absolutely sickening. Not sure how many assists, but that works out to 0.66 goals a game. So record goal scorer, you won't be surprised to hear that. 44 ahead of Zlatan Ibrahimovic. And he had some pretty ridiculous seasons at the Parc des Princes as well, didn't he? So he's only missed 6. He had missed 6 games with injury across 4 seasons between 13-14 and 17-18. So like I said, remained very fit, played an awful lot of minutes, so being on the bench quite alien to him. His body has started to fail a little bit more of late, so could probably do with opting for a league that's not quite as physically demanding. Obviously, PSG have a lot of possession anyway, and their forwards don't exactly have to press in a frightening manner, but he's not getting minutes, is he? So he needs to go to a team where he is going to get those minutes and a team that's not going to put that level of demand on him. So he has missed 38 games since the start of 18-19. So we'll need to manage himself maybe a little bit better, pick that move a little bit more wisely. Can't imagine him, having a heyday in the Premier League like Zlatan Ibrahimovic. It might have to be a league that is a little bit more kind to his body. So his 19-20 stats, just in case you're wondering, what sort of form he's been in when he has played, look a little bit like this. So 602 league minutes, that's just 14 appearances, 5 goal involvements, that's okay. 4.2 shots per 90, and that is equated to 1.6 expected goals and assists per 90. Obviously, that is so frightening because he's playing in such a dominant side and because the sample size is so small. I don't know where I see him. Linked with Flamengo in Brazil. He was linked with Chelsea, wasn't he? Pretty heavily. But I can see that. Falcao. I can see that probably going the way of Falcao. And I don't think the Premier League is a particularly kind league to enjoy sort of your latter years in, unless you're a physical freak. So, Flamengo would be great. He could probably elongate his playing career in Brazil for another 5 years, couldn't he? Or potentially, I would like to see him at Bloody hell, I was just thinking Leicester then. Him and Jamie Vardy could share the minutes up front. Two 34-year-olds heading them into the 2021 season. Won't exactly fill me with confidence. What about you, boys? Do you see Cavani sort of slotting in anywhere immediately, or do you think he's going to now be consigned to being an impact player from the bench?
It's difficult to say, really. I'd love to know the ins and outs of why that move to Atleti didn't go through in January, because as you said, it almost seemed sewn up. I think there were even media outlets saying that it was going to be announced in a couple of days, and then it still hasn't gone through. Frank Lampard, as you say, did show a lot of interest in January, said that he loved his mentality and his attitude. But does Cavani want to go to Chelsea to be, realistically, he probably need to be third choice with the way his body is right now? I'm not quite sure. So it's there's no natural fit really, because he's just that wrong side of his peak and with his body failing. So I'm sort of no clearer. Pat, do you have an idea of where Cavani could go?
I think that there are certain managers who are willing to give time to older players, often Italian managers and Jose Mourinho. And I think actually I would not be that surprised to see Spurs think about this. Like, I'm not sure they should, but given that it's so difficult to find somebody who's willing to be your backup striker at Spurs because you know that they're not going to play when Kane is fit, I think that a move for Cavani might feasibly make sense to spend, depending how long the contract is and how high the salary is. I think that he'd probably accept the minutes. I think he'd get a higher wage there than he would at most other places he could feasibly go to. If not, we have seen rumours linking him with Inter. And if Inter were to let Lautaro Martinez go and not immediately try and replace him with a young striker, I could imagine Conte thinking, you know what, between Lukaku and Eriksen behind him and Cavani, maybe I can piece together a decent attack for the season. Those are the kind of moves that I could see them doing. But to be honest, I'm not sure that anywhere's going to offer him the length of contract, the salary, and the prestige that Atletico Madrid will.
Yeah, for sure. I think, it feels like the obvious one to go for. Although Conte's Inter Milan, not a bad backup for Cavani. Okay, Pat, let's move on to someone else who, Cavani's very much at the end of his career. James Rodriguez, 28, not at the end of it by any means, but not getting the minutes he would want in any stretch. Do you see him being a potential move this summer?
I think he's got to. I think he's got to move this summer because he's just not playing. And if you're Real Madrid, you have to sell. I think he's got 340 minutes, something like that. So that's the equivalent of under 4 full games. And so the only players in the Real Madrid squad who he's paid more minutes than are Areola, Brahim Diaz, and Mariano. And so you kind of think, right, well, you're not playing at all. You're absorbing a huge wage. I really, and he's got a year left on his contract. So I really don't see what Real Madrid stand to gain from keeping him for another year. And when you look at how good he was in 18-19 when he was at Bayern, I think he was better at Bayern than Coutinho's been this season. I think Coutinho's been very good. But James Rodriguez was out of this world at Bayern. I mean, seriously, he got 8 goals and 13 assists in 35 games for them. I think his expected goals and assists per 90 is like 0.86. It was 4 key passes. And he was still taking a ton of shots. He was dribbling a reasonable amount. And he really improved his defensive output during his time there, playing that kind of free 8 role. We think of James Rodriguez as a luxury player, and to some degree he is, but he was putting up over 3 tackles and interceptions a game at his best at Bayern Munich, and that's not a luxury player. So I think that this summer, unless there's a bidding war for him, I think that actually you'll be able to get James Rodriguez out of there for a very reasonable fee, because Real Madrid have got to look at a last year paying his contract, which must be more than 150k a week. It must be. Real Madrid have got to look at that and say, you know what, any money we can get pales into insignificance almost in comparison to not having to pay that salary for the next year and losing him on a free. So I just think, I could see, Arsenal are looking for a number 10. I'm not sure they're going to go for James unless the price was very, 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 very good. Sub 20 million good. But Everton have been linked. Again, I'm not sure he's the right fit, but I could certainly see it happening because of Ancelotti because they're trying to show this ambition, because maybe they want somebody who is a dedicated 10, and he is a prestige player. Failing that, it's hard to really see anything beyond maybe AC Milan. I mean, you'd have thought of Inter before Eriksen went there. Juventus certainly aren't looking. They're going to be cutting their squad. PSG, unless they think, oh, well, maybe Di Maria, this is his last season, let's replace him, possibly. But I don't see why they do. I don't see why PSG would go to Real Madrid, given that if you go to Real Madrid for a player right now, I think they're going to say, okay, we want Mbappe somehow. So, to me, I think the best he can hold out for might be a sort of bigger Spanish side, or maybe if he lowers his wage demands, an Arsenal. I think that he's going to really struggle to find a move, which is a pity, because he's clearly the best player who's available for a knockdown fee this summer.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see whether those links with Napoli last summer were solely down to the fact they were managed by Ancelotti at the time, or whether the hierarchy, the directors of football, the men behind the scenes also thought he was a worthwhile acquisition. Because I was just thinking, Napoli might have quite a lot of cash this summer, because I think Koulibaly and Alan were promised moves by De Laurentiis last summer. And since everything's gone to shit out there, then I think they're probably likely to force a move. So Napoli could be an option for James. I just don't really want him to go to Everton. I feel like at 28, you can kind of aim higher than a club that's going to be competing for Europa League football. I think you can do better.
I think Everton. I'd much rather go to Everton now than Napoli. Like, the wages are going to be higher. You've got a better manager. I actually quite like a lot of the young players there, which means that I think that they should get a bit better over the next few years rather than worse. Like you said, with Napoli, like they could lose Alan, they could lose Koulibaly, they'll probably lose Fabian Ruiz as well. And I look at that team and I think there's not really a coherent plan. Like, the players on the pitch are gradually getting older and worse rather than younger and better. The managerial standard has significantly dropped over the last couple of seasons. I'd much rather go to Everton, pick up a huge wage, because you've got to bear in mind as well, James can't play the long game here. He's won everything at club level anyway, but he can't say, you know what, I can go to Napoli for a couple of years and then hope that I'll go on to, say, Juventus and have another couple of years where I win some titles. He can't do that now. He's basically got to say, this next contract is my last big contract, and I think he's much likely to get better money at Everton than he is at Napoli, because wages in Italy are low, and Napoli at the moment are trying to sign Lorenzo Insigne to another much longer contract, and they'll put their money into that.
Just a really interesting battle as to whether James's ego is going to allow him to go to a club like Everton. Of course, we saw him go head-to-head with Kovac when he was at Bayern Munich, when he said, this isn't Frankfurt. We're used to doing a certain thing here, and he's used to achieving a certain degree of success. And whether or not he would accept, even for a very healthy wage, being very much part of a development side, and a side that probably only harbours aspirations of qualifying for the Europa League, would be fascinating, to be perfectly honest. It might make sense from his, bank account's point of view, but he would have to be making an admission of sorts, wouldn't he, that he's no longer of a sufficient calibre to attract the really, really top sides.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. The thing he might do is say, you know what, I am going to sit out this next year, and I think that as a free agent next summer, I can command a high wage. But I actually think that if he spends next season the way he spent this season, I don't think he'd command a higher wage even as a free agent than Everton would offer him. I think Everton would offer him the most they possibly could, which is probably getting on for 150k a week.
Yeah, I think Gylfi's on like 100 plus, right?
Yeah, so I think, like, even if James were to wait until next summer and then he probably would get a move to a bigger club, because they'd say, yeah, you know what, like, why not? But I don't think he'd get a longer contract, and I think he'd probably get a lower wage if he comes off 2 seasons where he's played a combined like 1,000 minutes across all competitions. So yeah, I think his ego will be an issue, but I'm pretty certain his agent, is he a Jorge Mendes client?
He is, yeah, which is why those rumours about Wolves keep going.
I'm pretty certain Jorge Mendes is going to be saying to him, James, I do actually need to pay someone to clean my pool, like maybe you might want to think about moving this summer.
Fair. I mean, yeah, it's worthwhile bringing up those wages because according to my reading, he's on £280,000 a week at the moment. So
Jesus Christ.
That's what I read online. Don't hold me to that. But yeah, double check that, Real Madrid fans. Get back to us in the comments below about what hammers his wages. Because if that is true, it's going to be difficult for him to move anywhere. I'm briefly going to touch on another player who's currently in the Premier League before we get on to some more interesting bargain buys. Because David Silva is obviously available on a free transfer this summer. His end of his contract at Man City. Absolute club legend, goes without saying. 4 Premier League titles, numerous cups. I think 5 League Cups. Arguably one of the best imports in Premier League history. Still doing the business this year. I think it's 10 Premier League goal involvements and about 16 starts and about 22 games overall. So still a phenomenal player. And it looks like he's going to be the player that goes to become the marquee name at Inter Miami, David Beckham's new franchise. But failing that, maybe a move back to Valencia on a short-term deal would be quite romantic, maybe as a short-term replacement for Ferran Torres, who looks like he's going to Dortmund. So that's what I was thinking. But guys, I'm going to throw some other names out there. Because with bargains, I often think you need to really look for really young players, which we'll get onto, or players that have very not much longer on their contracts. So players with 1 year left on their contracts include Sandro Tonali and Florian Thauvin. Now, Pat, I know you've been quite a big fan of Tonali for quite a while. Do you think he could be available for a sort of reduced fee this summer, or do you think Brescia are going to be like, this is our big asset, we're going to rinse it for all we've got?
I don't think it matters. I think Brescia are going to go down and they're going to need the cash. And this is a move that they've known is coming for a long time. I mean, Sandro Tonali has been spoken about in Italy for 2 years now, I think. Like really, really highly rated. And I just think like when Juventus or Inter go in for these players, they always get them for almost nothing. Like, it's what I imagine will happen is Juventus will sign him. Maybe Inter if they're lucky. But Juventus will probably sign him and they'll loan him out to a mid-table Italian side for a year. I don't think that Brescia can really hold out for much money at all. And actually, a lot of money to Brescia. 10 million might be a lot of money to Brescia. Like, they don't have a huge amount of cash. The thing is about Tonali, he's getting real minutes at a young age in a proper league. That's impressive. He's got good key pass numbers, but I would probably have a little bit of caution there because a lot of them are set pieces. When you look at the rest of his numbers, there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, what I'd really want to see from somebody in a team that's struggling at the lower end of the table is you'd expect to see tons of defensive action. And there's very, very little. I think it's like just over 2 tackles and interceptions per 90 he's putting up right now. That is unusual. So I worry a little bit that he's not showing more. Like when you compare this to other 19-year-old midfielders who've been kind of exciting, like this is way below what, say, Guendouzi was putting out at Arsenal last season. But Tonali looks like a very good passer. To me, it feels a little bit like a romantic move. I think that there's an element here. I think everyone's just looking at him and thinking Pirlo. Like, he's long been called the new Pirlo. He's in that lineage of that kind of deep-lying playmaker at Brescia. You know, Pep Guardiola played that position there. Andrea Pirlo played that position there. Now Sandro Tonali plays that position there. And so I think that there's a bit of romance, but he'll go to Juve or Inter for probably 12 million euros.
I hope he doesn't, because I mean, we've seen people like Gagliardini, people like Bernardeschi go to these sort of clubs in recent times. Obviously, Inter Milan have kind of stockpiled on central midfielders at the moment as well, with Gagliardini and Barella, so on and so forth. Sensi, I was going to say Benacer, but that's obviously AC.
Well, there's tons. There's Brozovic, there's Vecino, there's Valero, like all those guys.
Yeah, but just in terms of like these young Italian guys who are arriving from the lower reaches of Serie A, and I really hope that Tonali just takes an in-between step, because I can see him not necessarily getting any minutes. I mean, Kulusevski's just been signed as well by Juventus. Obviously, he's been loaned back out. They spent massive money on him, so they might have one eye on financial fair play following that signing. But like you said, this is Brescia, not Atalanta. You pay an absolute premium on talents that are coming out of Zingonia. That's not going to be the case with with Brescia, who are going down, and they're sort of between a rock and a hard place kind of thing. But I've been watching. I watched a few highlight reels of him, and he is an easy player to fall in love with. You're right. But I just hope he makes a more progressive step. I'd love to see him just at an in-between club, like I said, maybe a Europa League club, for example. I don't want him to get swaddled up in the Italian sort of football's tussle for the next big thing. Because I think there's another 4 or 5 players out there that are in danger of kind of going under the radar.
Yeah, for sure. He needs to be carefully managed. The name I mentioned before Tonali, Chris, was Florian Thauvin. You've long talked about Ayoze Perez possibly being the player that could be replaced in that front line for Leicester. Would Florian Thauvin, coming off the back of an injury, but fantastic form before that, be someone you might look at?
Yeah, I mean, Marseille, there's a feel-good factor around Marseille at the moment, isn't there? Because they're enjoying, one of their best spells in a decade under Andre Villas-Boas. And the season started disastrously, and they were up against it with financial fair play. And it looked like they were going to have to sell Florian Thauvin in excess of 30 million. But they didn't, and they retained him, which would suggest to me that they're going to try and keep him by any means. And Villas-Boas has probably made that clear to the board in light of having to part way with some of his better talents, right? So I think it's going to be quite hard to get him out. His contract obviously expires 2021, like you said. But his numbers have just been outstanding for the last 2 years. And not just chance creation, he's taking in excess of 3 shots in most Liga and seasons. He's completing a couple of dribbles. His expected goals and assists is like 0.6. If this was a player who hadn't failed, and I put that in inverted commas because a lot of players have failed at Newcastle recently, then it is someone we'd probably back to the hilt, right? In terms of getting that Premier League move. He's approaching his best years for a winger, although he is more cultured than just being a winger. And I do think he's worth a gamble. I would certainly favour him over Ayoze Perez. Although, I mean, Ayoze Perez has played as an inside forward, so has Thauvin. Perez is probably better in a... No. I was going to say Perez probably is more used to playing as a wide player, right? If Brendan Rodgers ever was to want that from him, whereas Thauvin, I've not seen him play like wide. But I digress anyway, just to come back to the point. Yeah, I think he would be really worthwhile pursuit, and you could probably, I think, between 40 and 50 million euros this summer. But anything below that, and I think Marseille are just gonna probably take a loss on him.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm with you. I think he looks but considering that injury he's had this year, could be available for a bargain price, hence why we're including him. The final name I wanted to mention in detail on this 1 year left of their contract in June is Kevin Volland of Bayer Leverkusen. Signed, I think it was 4 years ago from Hoffenheim for then a club record fee. Been a really consistent goal scorer for Bayer Leverkusen for throughout that time. I think it was 14 goal contributions in each of the last 2 full seasons. And then this year, he had 9 goals and 7 assists at the break and play, with really healthy shot numbers. His expected goals and assists was something like 0.82. It'd been over 0.7 for a little while, and Bayer Leverkusen won't want to sell him. But with that 1 year left on his contract, then unless they force him into a deal, then they're they're between a rock and a hard place, really. And he again, I think, could be a very able backup for a lot of top 6 clubs. I'm not sure whether he's at the level to start for a Spurs if they lose Kane, or an Arsenal if they lose Aubameyang, but I think he'd be a really useful squad player for anyone in and around the Champions League spots throughout Europe. So that's my shout. Guys, I'm going to throw some names at you, and let's see which ones you take, or particularly take your interest. So Julian Draxler has 1 year left on his contract. Juan Bernat, Vendel, Bryce Mendes, Højbjerg, Luka Modric, and Sangare. Pat, I know you've been a fan of Sangare for a while. Would you be looking for, say, if Torreira moved on from Arsenal this summer, would you see Sangare coming in?
Even if Torreira didn't move on, rumours are Arsenal want Thomas Partey. If you can't get Thomas Partey, Songare would be a very good alternative. I think I first talked about Songare on one of the very, very early Extra Time podcasts. I think when we were talking about Man United, actually, maybe our first How to Fix. And he just looks like a really impressive player, like great defensive output, really good dribbler, pretty decent passer as well, and extremely young. He's definitely, of the names you mentioned, Songare and Højbjerg are the ones who stand out to me. I think Draxler will probably get a pretty decent move. I think he'll probably go... He could maybe go to a Leverkusen or something like that. That I think would probably make a lot of sense. And Vendel as well, if his fitness is okay. Like Vendel's a pretty interesting player. But Højbjerg is a great, great all-round midfielder. Like a really good defender. He's not old. He's got good progressive passing numbers. He will just slot into whatever role you require of him. He's actually the player who a lot of Champions League sides could really do with. Like... Not somebody who's going to be spectacular. He's not going to be like the first name on the team sheet, but he will perform to a high level, whatever you ask him to do. And when you look at some teams, you know, like Spurs, like Arsenal, certainly like Man United this season, Man United could really have they could absolutely have used a guy this season who was just a reliable presence in the centre of the park and would keep things ticking over. But that's probably a bit of a disservice to him. He's a better player than that. So I'd certainly look at Højbjerg, and I think Songare, he's got to go this summer because Toulouse are going to get relegated.
Yeah, no, seems like a ready-made for a pickup. And Chris, the other name that will grab a lot of attention in there is Luka Modric. Where do you see him going this summer, if at all?
I mean, he is 34 years old now, isn't he? So in a similar position, to David Silva, I imagine the allure of the MLS might be hard to turn down in the next 12 months or so, as he would be, a marquee player in one of their sides. I think Real Madrid probably still need him at the moment. We've had this debate with some fans on this channel. They're not that set in central midfield, or as set as certain people have made out. Particularly if Isco and James Rodriguez move on, right? Then you're probably in need of an all-action midfielder who can fill those huge shoes. We've spoke about Paul Pogba on the Extra Time podcast going to Real Madrid, how he could be an ideal replacement for someone like Luka Modric, who can, like Paul Pogba, be deployed anywhere in midfield and, to his detriment sometimes, make the team better. So I do think it's probably going to be more interesting who Real choose to replace him with, as opposed to where he chooses to go. I feel like that might be a bit of a foregone conclusion in the MLS or Inter Milan. I can't imagine Conte having too much of a problem with him being 34 going on 35. And would probably rotate him in that midfield. I mean, we've seen the likes of... saying that, we have just spoke about Gagliardini, Barella. So would he get minutes? Maybe at AC. Although, AC want Ralph Rangnick to come in and sort of revolutionise the club, which would suggest they're going to go for a younger profile of player. I don't know, Doogie. I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to go MLS. But Real Madrid are going to have to spend money to replace him because Fede Valverde is not Luka Modric.
Yeah, very different styles of player. I couldn't agree more. Although Fede Valverde has looked excellent in his brief start to his Real Madrid career so far. At the opposite end of the scale from Luka Modric, is Jonathan David, the 20-year-old Canadian striker who's at Ghent. He won't be, it won't cost an arm and a leg this year. 18 goals in 27 league games at 20. Along with Alphonso Davies. There's a really good crop of North American talent coming through in the US and in Canada by the looks of things. 12 goals in 33 last year, backs that up and more this year. Looks ready-made for a lower top 5 league club, I would say. Mohamed Ihataren is also getting a lot of press. 18-year-old number 10 at PSV. 3 goals and 4 assists in 22 Eredivisie games. Can't say I've watched him play, but is very highly talked of. So potential to...
Is this from your Football Manager stint, Doogie? You've gone full wonderkid.
Yeah, it's exactly. Jonathan David was recommended to me for my Inter Milan save. And I had a look, and he does look very tasty. It's the benefits of Football Manager. It really does help with your scouting. But yeah, that's our takes on bargain buys, both young and old, this summer. Let us know if you've got any other suggestions in the comments down below. And let's move on to quickfire questions. We're just going to do one quickfire question this week, and it comes in from @BradleyBissett, who says, who in Europe's top 5 leagues will come out of this break a better side, having benefited from the sort of enforced time off? Pat, who's your suggestion for this?
Well, I think you've got to look at the teams that have players ruled out long term. So I think Spurs, definitely. Like, Spurs were really primed for a big drop before the league got called off because they had such significant injuries. They were so thin. Everyone looked gassed in the middle of the park. Mourinho was complaining about it endlessly. And now they've got some time. Like Kane can come back to fitness. Son can come back to fitness. Tanguy and Ndombele can rest up, who's obviously got that recurrent back issue. A lot of their older players have played a lot of time this season. Like Vertonghen is looking leggy. So I think having all those people get a few weeks off would not be the worst idea, because even if they come back and say they can get some minutes out of Kane, Son's fully fit and Ndombele's fully fit, that in itself is a huge difference, I think.
They've been training on the park, haven't they?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, like, they should be ashamed of themselves, to be honest with you. But
sackable offence. Get rid of him. Chris, what about for you?
Okay, yeah, I mean, on that same... I've got a really dry throat, my bad. On that same train of thought, Lyon have a couple of big players out, don't they? In Memphis Depay and Jeff-René Adelaide, who hasn't exactly hit the ground running after his big money move from Angers in the summer. So that's going to have a similar impact for them. Yeah, I've not probably got a better answer than that, a more interesting answer than that.
Yeah, fair enough. Lyon's a good shout. Depay, so crucial to their hopes. I've got actually quite a niche shout of Bournemouth. They had really bad injuries this year, and their form was atrocious throughout. It looks like they were heading towards the relegation zone. I think they'd only picked up something like 11 points out of their last 20 league games, or something ridiculous like that. So they were plummeting towards the drop zone. And, this will hopefully allow them to get Kelly back, Daniels, David Brooks as well. So potentially things looking up for Eddie Howe. I think I tweeted about it a couple of weeks ago that it might have, helped Eddie Howe keep his job, because it did look like they were slowly slipping towards the relegation zone.
Was that one manager showing support to another, Duga?
Exactly. I've been under pressure with Inter Milan. The fans will know that it hasn't all been rosy in the Nerazzurri garden with me at the helm. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching this week's edition of Continental Club. The second one brought to you from isolation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much to Chris and Pat for joining me. Let us know what you guys thought of it in the comment section down below, and what you want us to see cover next week. And yeah, anything to add from you guys? Anything to watch?
You can check out Extra Time if you want. Download the podcast or watch it on YouTube, but preferably do both. This week, Doogie, you're on it. You're the guest.
I am indeed. Chris, anything from you?
Yeah, go and check out We Need to Talk on Football Daily. That would have gone live an hour before this, hopefully, if everything went according to plan. Joe working away in his kitchen to get that out. So go and show him some support.
Exactly. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Bye.